Hello and welcome back to goldstocktrades.com. Today we have back here with us George Salamis. George is chairman of Integra Gold Corporation, which could be traded as ICG on the TSX Venture and as ICGQF on the OTCQX. Thanks, George, for being back here with us today.
Good morning, Jeb. Great to be back on the show.
George, could you talk about Integra owns the Sigma Lamaque mine and mill. Talk to us about your history.
A lot of family history with respect to Val-d'Or and more specifically the Sigma and Lamaque project itself. My father was working on that project in the late 50s and early 60s, and his name is still on a lot of the technical reports that are in the assessment files in Val-d'Or, so that's really interesting. And my sister was born there in 1960, and some of my own kids were born in Val-d'Or as well. My first job at a university in 1988 was working at that mine site, and it was a great opportunity for me to learn the business. I was very spoiled to have worked at what was at the time one of the highest grade mines in Canada. I thought after that every ore deposit that I would ever work on would be 8 grams per ton and would have, the infrastructure that mine has. It turns out that wasn't the case after having traveled the globe after that, but it was a great opportunity for me.
George, the Lamaque mine has a lot of competitive advantages. It's a high-grade project in a world-class established infrastructure. In addition, there's been a huge increase in M&A activity, especially in Quebec. Having experience both on working for the majors and working in the junior sector, what makes Integra Gold's Lamaque assets so compelling to a mid-tier producer or a major?
Yeah, I think as our resource base increases, and I think we'll be able to show that in the coming weeks. I think as that resource base grows, that will obviously become more attractive to mid-tiers and majors. I think sort of the big box that it ticks is grade, obviously. The high grades of gold that we have, sort of 10 and 12 grams per ton respectively, those are our real draw because, on a production basis, it makes for a fair bit of margin, even at operating margin or profit margin even at low gold prices. So that's one box that gets ticked. And the other one, of course, is the jurisdiction. Quebec is, in my view, certainly probably the best place in the world to be exploring and operating a mine. Very, very pro-mining government, pro-mining municipality in Val-d'Or. Workforce is up there, incentives to explore and operate mines. So, it really ticks those big boxes for the majors, and I know that that's what the majors look at first when they're looking at acquiring an asset.
George, could you highlight the recent preliminary economic assessment that was published and some of the economics and what was so compelling about this recent PEA?
Yeah, sure. So some of our shareholders might recall that in March last year we did a PEA study that looked at what it would cost to build and operate a mining operation in the order of 120 to 140,000 ounces a year on the Lamaque South projects, and the PEA at the time came back with very good returns that we were able to demonstrate. But the team got together sort of mid-year last year and said, okay, how can we make this study better? And really, the most obvious place for us to improve on what we're already really good economics were, let's try and see if we can buy our own milling operation and right across the street, again, coming full circle back to the Sigma mine, which is where I started my career, where a lot of our current employees started their careers, was the Sigma milling operation. And it was in bankruptcy, so that was really a no-brainer for us to look at acquiring for cents on the dollar. And so the PEA that we put out in just a few weeks ago basically incorporated that acquisition into the existing PEA. So, what it served to do was obviously bring our cash costs plus sustaining costs per ounce down significantly as a result of owning our own milling operation. We're now sitting at cash cost plus sustaining costs of about $730 an ounce. Pre-tax IRRs of 77%, which is spectacular. 184 million net present value. So, those are really good metrics by anybody's standard, and we were pretty conservative in terms of the metrics that we used in the study. Gold input prices of $11.75 per ounce, Canadian dollar exchange rate, which is really working in our favor and a lot of other favors in terms of gold production in Canada, was pretty conservative. So, there's a lot of upside there that hasn't been accounted for yet, but spectacular PA result.
One of the highlights with especially a growing junior mining gold company is the potential for exploration upside. Could you talk to us about some of the plans going into 2015 of the drilling plans and some of the exploration plans at the project?
Yeah, sure. So we have what I think is going to end up being one of the most aggressive exploration programs, certainly in Quebec, coming up. We announced last week about 50,000 meters of drilling. We'll be moving to 7 or 8 drill rigs here shortly on the project. That would make it sort of, for sure, at least sort of top 3 exploration efforts in Eastern Canada with that number of rigs. So we've got an aggressive program on the go. I think when we release the resource estimate shortly, I think people will see, where the obvious targets are, how we've grown the resources, where the upside potential is, where things are opening up, where critical mass is shaping up. In and around the Triangle Zone, for example, there's some very obvious sort of lateral and down dip targets for us to start testing. So we've got a big exploration program planned for targets in and around the areas of what's known. The areas that we are focusing on the PEA. And then we've got a kind of a second order of magnitude targets, which is, more sort of mid-stage exploration targets, following up on things that we intercepted last year, which had, one-off high-grade intercepts that require a bit more work. So we've got lots to do on our project. And then, in the end of the day, obviously we're not looking at funding this next idea, but it's one that's what I think is, really high potential, and this is down the track to be explored. But the whole concept of Lamaque Deeps and what we think is a 4 million ounce potential sitting below the existing Lamaque main plug that was mined down to about 1,000 meters.
I'd like to discuss the management team that Integra has put together and some of the history of that this management team that's worked together on this project. Could you highlight some of the key players in the Integra story?
Yeah, for sure. So Steve DeJong, no stranger to you, Jeb. I think he's been on your show a few times now. Steve has done a phenomenal job at putting the team together. He's worked on the Lamaque South project now for most of his career, so he knows it like the back of his hand. So he can be accredited for working the project up, and I think equally as important, assembling an exploration team with a legacy, a positive legacy in that area. So Steve has obviously been the driver around that initiative, and then there's what I would consider to be one of the best exploration teams and development teams in Eastern Canada, and that's all of the former sort of Placer Dome people who worked in the Sigma mine in the 80s and 90s. They're back together. We have the band back together again, and that's great. And last but not least, I think hugely important to us is the guy who's going to spearhead our transference into production, and that's Langier St. Pierre. Longis is a great hand. He started his career in Abitibi in this area, working in underground mining operations, and worked his way up the ladder. The last operation he ran in West Africa, Essakane, had 2,000 employees. It was a mine that was producing well over 200,000 ounces a year. So, he knows production. So between Longis, between Hervé Thibouteau, who was my first boss in the business, there is no better exploration geologist who can transition from exploration to mining than Hervé, and then as well François Chabot, who worked at Sigma as well. Great engineer. We've got the team to get this done.
George Salamis, chairman of Integra Gold, which can be traded as ICG on the TSX Venture and as ICGQF on the OTCQX. Thanks so much for being back here with us today and for giving us an insightful update into Integra Gold.
Thank you, Jeff.